Hey friends, welcome to the estate planning webinar for you and your family. Key action steps and ideas that you can implement today. We've got a great presentation lined up for you. My name is Adam Hammer along with Paul Hammer. Before we get to our presentation though, I'm going to turn it over to Paul, who's got a story he'd like to share with us.
Hello there. Yeah, we're going to use stories throughout this presentation to drive home the estate planning topics. To introduce these stories are all true with clients that we have worked with over the years. So it's 2006, and there's a rainstorm approaching, and Dad has a leak in his roof. And yes, I'm talking about my own mom and dad. So Dad decides at 80 years old he's going to go up on that roof and find that leak and take care of it. It doesn't end well. Dad falls off the roof and injures himself severely. He's airlifted out to a university hospital where the doctors miraculously can save his life. Out in the hospital is my mom, two of my siblings, and one of the neighbors. And the doctors, though, inform them that his injuries are so severe, they don't know who is going to come back cognitively and physically because he's got so many injuries, including a severe brain injury. Mom was in no condition to make the decision, and the doctors asked about the end of life wishes of my father. And at that point, the neighbor chimed in and mentioned how they were the witness on that document and that Dad did not want any life support systems at all. With that, it was an easy decision for the family out there to make. Dad was allowed to pass away peacefully, surrounded by his family, and it turned out to be an okay situation versus what it could have been if that document, the medical proxy, was not in place. Mom, again, was in no condition. She was the one who was on that document. So that's the first document that we introduced today. This is a true story. It's a sad story. But again, the important part was that medical proxy was in place and was used at the time it was needed. My name again is Paul Hammer. I'm delighted to be here with you today. I've studied finance my entire life. It's what my passion is. And I have no retirement date. It's what I love to do. So I plan to continue to do it. And I call Myrtle Beach home for a few years now. And you can see it there on the screen are two of my favorite places when I come to visit. That is the Myrtle Beach State Park. If you can get there early enough during the summer months, so you can get a spot underneath that fishing pier and you don't need to drag your umbrella with you. And if you're familiar with it, you're also see that sign there about the elevation being 1 foot. Just an interesting sign we thought we'd introduce. So I'd like to spend as much time as I can at the beach. I miss the salt water. It's a great place for a lot of long walks and a good book. I'm delighted to be here today.
Yes, thank you, Paul. And once again, I'm Adam. I followed in Paul's footsteps, as you might imagine, father-son team located here in Myrtle Beach. So thank you all for being here. Before we get to the presentation, you have a question and answer section, a box on your screen. That's where you can ask any questions during the webinar. We will do our best to answer every question that we can. If we can't get to your question, we will respond to you and get back to you with an answer. These questions are all, and the answers are anonymous, so you don't have to feel like you're going to be public about something. And at this time, you can use that Q&A box. We'd like to know where you are watching the webinar from. Are you in Myrtle Beach? Maybe you're in New York City. Maybe you're in the Galapagos Islands. So take a second now to just type that in. We'll see where the responses are coming from. Looks like we have Mullins, South Carolina, beautiful rural area. Thank you for being here. We've got Charleston, South Carolina, and of course, good old Myrtle Beach. Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. Got a great presentation, so keep listening. We're going to get into our presentation now. A lot of people might ask, well, why do I need a financial advisor? Isn't all estate planning done by an attorney? And the answer to that question is no. Attorneys are important in the estate planning process. If you look at the left side of your screen, they're kind of doing the documents part of estate planning. Probate, will, trust, durable power of attorney. They've got the physical documents on hand, dotting the I's, crossing the T's. But if you look on the right side of the screen, that's known as estate planning strategies. And this is something that you need to do with a financial advisor. It's what Paul and I do when we help clients with their estate plan. And we're going to be talking about a lot of the topics that you see up on your screen: cost basis, tax management, Roth conversions, required minimum distributions, gifting, life insurance, beneficiaries, transfer on death, long-term care. And so you need someone to be the quarterback, someone who's going to lay out these strategies for you so that your estate plan can be set up in a way that makes sense, that works for you, and ultimately protects and provides for your family. So in the estate planning process, you need an attorney, but you also need a financial advisor, and it's the strategies that we're going to talk about today. All right. Let's start with a story. Paul mentioned we'll be talking about a number of stories today. Up on your screen, we've got two gentlemen. On your left, you may not know him or recognize him. His name is Randy Pausch. The man on your right, you probably do recognize. His name was James Gandolfini. James Gandolfini was an actor in the hit series The Sopranos. And Randy Pausch was an author of The Last Lecture and a YouTube sensation. Really, the only thing that these two men have in common is that they're both no longer with us. They both passed on. But the way that they passed on was very different. Their estate plans were very different, and the outcomes that their families got was very different. And we're going to talk about what happened here. But first, let's just start with a quote from Randy Pausch. From his book, The Last Lecture. He says, "What wisdom would you try to impart to the world if you knew it was your last chance?" And of course, we hope it's not our last chance or your last chance, but we do hope that we give you some wisdom today on estate planning and give you a lot of key ideas and action steps that you can take that can be helpful. All right, Randy Pausch, who was this guy? As mentioned, he was the author of The Last Lecture. He was a computer science professor at Carnegie Mellon University. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at 45. Of all the cancers, you really do not want pancreatic cancer. He became a YouTube sensation. He made all the media rounds. Ultimately, he died at the age of 47. Randy had the benefit, if you will, if you want to say it that way, of knowing that his time was short. And because he knew that his time was short, he had an estate plan that was very laid out and very prepared. He was able to pass on assets to his wife, to his children, to charitable causes that he cared about. He was very, very prepared. And in his book, The Last Lecture, if you look at this second bullet point here, be prepared, right? Preparation is going to be a big part of this presentation, and we're here to help you be prepared and help you get the outcomes that you want. James Gandolfini, though, his outcome was very, very different. As mentioned, he was the actor of Tony Soprano on the HBO series The Sopranos, the crime mafia series. He died unexpectedly at 50, and his son found him passed out dead in the bathroom when they were in Rome. But take a look at these last two bullet points. He left only 20% of his estate to his wife. The 80% did not go to his wife. In the last bullet point, look at that, 30 million of 70 million went to the government. I mean, wow, talk about a tax bill there. A lot of Gandolfini's estate went to his sisters and to a daughter. So Gandolfini didn't do enough estate planning, and unfortunately, the government really took a whack to him. So anyway, the point of this is the difference between being prepared and not being prepared. And so we want to make sure that you end up more like Randy did in terms of his estate plan.
Yeah, there's no magic age that you need to start thinking about your estate plan. It's important at all stages of your life. So as Adam's gone over that story with those two gentlemen, a lot of planning could have been done for both of them. One of them did get a lot done, and one probably continued to say, I have a lot of time. And that's the part we don't know about. What we cover in today's presentation is not legal advice. Please speak with an estate planning attorney for more details. And a little bit later on, we'll tell you some of the events in your life that may happen when you do need to speak to an attorney. And also, as we go through today's presentation and we have our stories that are all true, please realize that There are many solutions to the estate planning process and the problems that it entails, and there's always more than one way to skin the cat. So as much as we provide a solution to one of the stories we have, there was probably a couple of different ways it could have been solved. So please bear in mind there's more than one way to skin the cat, so to speak. All right, so do you even need an estate plan? You may have modest assets. You may not have any relatives. You may not have married or have any children. So it's like, what do I need an estate plan for? Well, if you don't have the basic will, you're known as passing away, dying intestate, and that means somebody else is going to make the decision for you. That usually means a state and local governments get involved. So you really want to have at least the very basic documents in place, a will, medical proxy, and we'll be going over some other items to help pass assets on that will bypass probate. When probate gets involved, think of courts, think of attorneys, think of expenses. So yes, do you need an estate plan? Everyone needs an estate plan. What are some of the common estate planning problems? Well, we didn't get around to having a will or a trust or the advanced healthcare directives. There's overlooked provisions such as we don't have any guardians for children. We don't think we have a tax problem, so we're not going to do any tax planning. And finally, it's like, well, this could cost money, and I've got better things to spend my money on, so I'm not going to do it. These are all weak arguments. A will can be as simple as an "I love you" will, a couple $100, and you make sure that document's in place, and you usually have the healthcare directive in there. You certainly do want to have guardians for your minors, and having family members listed may not be the proper choice. More on that a little bit later. And if you like paying taxes, then don't do any tax planning, but the tax man's going to come, so doing everything you can to avoid the taxes is important. And again, many of the items that we talk about today are cost-free or very, very small cost.
All right, let's look at a poll here. Everyone likes public polling, right? Gallup poll shows that 55% of adults don't have a will, and you don't have to feel bad about that because all of you took the right step here in signing up for the webinar and trying to get better and make sure that you have an estate plan in place. And you can see that the poll is down from 51% who reported having a will in 2005. So we're going to hopefully in this webinar make the point and drive home the importance of having a lot of this estate planning done. But good to you to take the first step here in being on the webinar with us. I do want to share a story with you about Heath Ledger. Some of you maybe have an estate plan, but maybe it needs updating. And I'm going to share a story with you about why it's important to be updated. Heath Ledger, of course, was the actor who most famously played the Joker in one of the Batman films. And he did pass away rather early in life. But his will was not updated, so his estate went to his sisters and his parents, but he had a 2-year-old daughter that really didn't get anything because his will was not updated. Of course, he thought that he had a lot more time left, and maybe he thought he'd update things later. But you can see the problem with sort of pushing things off like that. Fortunately, the story does have a happy ending. The sisters and the parents did take care of that daughter. But sometimes that's not always the way it lays out when family members get involved. So at this time, we're going to do our first poll question here in the webinar. We'd like to know, when was the last time you reviewed your will and trust documents? Last year, 3 years ago, 4 to 6 years, a long time ago, or none of the above? And you can take a second to fill that out. Again, all these are anonymous.
Okay, so what are some of the events that might trigger the need for updating it? Well, certainly things like a divorce or a marriage, and this can be you personally or someone else in your family. Grandchildren arrive, a second marriage. And think about this one. This is another true story. It's a short one. These are friends of ours who were telling us how their dad was on his second marriage and did everything joint rights survivorship with the new wife. The first wife had passed away, and informed them that don't worry, everything is set up to be equally shared between the dad's children and the new wife's children. Dad had 3 children. The new wife had 2 children on her side. Everything would be split evenly, bank accounts, retirement accounts, and the house. And Dad kept just telling them, yep, everything is done, everything is done. So that's all that everybody knew. But Dad passed away, and then within 9 months, the wife passed away. And what they found was, since everything was in joint rights of survivorship, when Dad passed away, the new wife and their children came up with a new estate plan, and all the assets went to the 2 children. For the wife, including the house, they put a document in place so that when the house was sold, all the money went to the 2 children. So again, because there wasn't a good enough conversation and people involved enough, all the assets that in theory were going to be split between 5 people went to 2 people.
Yes, and that story kind of drives home the point of preparation, because it'll make not only your life easier while you're living, but also in death with all your beneficiaries and the executors of your will to make life easier on everybody. And I'm going to share a story now of someone who was prepared. Our first real life story here with McDonald's Jerry. You might say, why in the world do you call him McDonald's Jerry? Well, he goes to McDonald's every single day for breakfast. I'm not kidding you. I'm not pulling your leg. He goes, gets his McDonald's hot cakes every single morning. And real colorful guy. But anyway, here's the story. He's widowed at 80, had some memory issues, kind of just said, a bunch of, just old age, no big deal. Anyway, one day he's out on his trip to McDonald's and he lost control of his vehicle, got into an accident, and became temporarily unresponsive in the hospital. And so, of course, a lot of important medical decisions that needed to be made. The doctors had asked the family, hey, is there someone in place here, a medical proxy, healthcare proxy in place to help Jerry out? And remember, if there is no healthcare proxy in place, the court, the legal process can get involved and appoint to make decisions on your behalf, or in this case, maybe on Jerry's behalf. But fortunately, Jerry was prepared. He did have one of his cousins that was named as the medical proxy, got his medical care, and the story has a happy ending. He recovered and he quickly resumed his daily trips to McDonald's. So, of course, the lesson here is making sure that you choose someone and designate a healthcare agent ahead of time, someone that you trust, someone who think is capable of making the right decisions, because we certainly don't want the courts to make that decision for you.
All right, sudden incapacity. So no one knows your medical wishes if you're incapacitated. And if no one's appointed to make those medical decisions for you, as Adams mentioned, the legal society will come in and do that for you. And the other bigger one is no one has the authority to handle your finances. So one of the items we go over with clients, especially clients who are near retirement or in retirement, is that whether or not the power of attorney has been in place for each of them. And the reason why that's important is this is another actual true story. That's actually a funny one a little bit. So new clients, and they're retiring, and most of the assets are in the husband's name. He was the main breadwinner. She had some part-time work, but never really saved money. So the bulk of the assets are in the husband's name. And then when we're discussing things, I said, well, I think it's important that you get a power of attorney in place. And the wife asked, well, why do I need that? And as much as the husband was the one with all the assets, it was the wife who kind of ran the household. So she said, why is that important? I said, well, if something happens to Rich, if he's in the hospital and he's incapacitated for any length of time and can't make decisions, and you need money, you cannot access his IRA accounts. That's why you need to get a power of attorney. She goes, what do you mean I can't access that IRA? I said, well, IRAs are in the husband's name. And as much as you're the beneficiary, you cannot call me up and request money be sent, because you need to have that power of attorney, because all these assets are in Rich's name. Well, the funny part was she got on the phone immediately, called the attorney that they use, who was a high school friend, and the next day a power of attorney was executed. So you want to make sure that one. So if you find yourself in retirement and you don't have the power of attorney in place, just realize that retirement assets would be out of your reach. Okay, by the bloodline, this is a beneficiary area that is very, very important to be reviewed and gone over. And the key word here down on the bottom in bold letters is persterpes, and that kind of means by the bloodline. So here we have Andrea, who has 3 adult children, all married off on their own, and she also has 6 grandchildren. Now, the 3 daughters are the named beneficiaries to Andrea's accounts. Sadly, Andrea's oldest child predeceases her, which leaves 2 beneficiaries left. And then Andrea passed away. Now, if there was no corrections and updates made to those beneficiary forms, the assets, instead of being paid to 3 beneficiaries, get paid to the 2 surviving beneficiaries. Nothing goes to the oldest daughter who passed away. Nothing goes to her children. And that certainly was not Andrea's wishes. So by adding the persterpes box, checking that off on the beneficiary form or writing it in, a lot of different ways to do it, the persterpes box would make sure that the children of the oldest child who had passed away will receive the assets that Andrea wanted them to have. So it's by the bloodline. It doesn't go to the, if you have a couple and the beneficiary passed away, it doesn't go to the spouse of that person. It will follow the bloodline and go to the children.
And before we move to our next slide, you may have seen our pictures pop up on the bottom of your screen there. That, if you click that, that will schedule your complimentary consultation with us. We're going to talk a little bit more about what that means at the end. But I think a lot of people even right now might be saying, wow, this is a lot of important information. I need someone to kind of help me go through that. You click that link, fill out some information, and Paul and I will be in touch with you shortly. And we'll get into what a strategy session actually looks like in short order. If we move to our next slide, we've got another story for you. It is the story of mechanic Billy. So what's going on here? Well, Billy was an employee of a company 401k plan that we were managing, auto mechanic. And unfortunately, Billy had some issues and he passed away in his bathtub. Well, anyway, on the beneficiary form, he listed his ex-girlfriend, as his beneficiary, not the current one, no family or friends. He listed the ex-girlfriend. Maybe he thought the ex-girlfriend was going to come back into his picture, but nonetheless, he did not update that beneficiary form. Obviously, you can imagine the family was pretty distraught and upset. There was some legal proceedings that took place. It got very ugly. So one thing to take away from this story is, yes, of course, make sure your beneficiary forms are updated. But at the same time, sometimes people think, well, maybe there's a cost or I'm going to have to pay to do this. That's not the case. You can change your beneficiaries at no cost, and it's very easy to do. So at this time, I want to hear from the audience, from all of you watching, our second poll question, which should pop up on your screen. When was the last time you updated your beneficiary forms for your IRA, 401k, or other qualified account? Last year, 1 to 5 years, long time ago, or none of the above? Of course, all of your answers are anonymous, so take a second to fill that out. Well, thank you for participating. All right, what's another reason why you may be watching this webinar and the importance of estate planning? Well, your kids are involved in your life, and maybe your kids are older, and you want to make sure that they're capable of managing your estate or managing your assets. Sometimes it's also that parents want to help their kids out while they're still living, right? You may want to help out your children if they have a business that they're running, or you want to help out the grandchildren. So estate planning can often be when you pass on and planning for your death, but it can also involve, lifetime distributions and sort of making your wishes known while you're still alive. So having kids now involved is another reason why you're thinking about estate planning. And to sort of move into that is taxes, because the way that your kids or your beneficiaries inherit your estate, taxes could play a big role. We're not going to get too down into the weeds here about taxes and what the rates are and how tax laws might change. but there are some ways that you might be able to pass on assets to your kids without getting drilled by taxes. And I believe Paul is going to tell us a strategy known as Roth conversions.
Sure. Yeah, when it comes to the estate taxes for most people, those taxes shouldn't be a worry at all. Currently, if you're single, you can give away $12 million. Married couples, 25 million. If you want to give away a certain amount of money in 1 year that is above the annual exclusion amount, you just fill out a form and say the excess amount could be applied against my lifetime exclusion of 12 million. So unless your estate is very, very large, probate taxes should not be too much of a concern, especially if you've got all the other documents in place. But one item that does come to mind is assets that have to pass through probate. And I'll be touching on that in just a minute. But first, here's the story of Lindsay and George. Lindsay was a participant in the 401k plan for us many, many years. And as she got close to retirement, we did the retirement planning that was needed. And when she did retire, she said, please come talk to George and I. We want to set up our estate plan. They have one daughter that's the only beneficiary. They live on pension and Social Security. They also have very healthy investment accounts and retirement accounts, but they were very frugal in their life. And between Social Security and pensions, they live the life they want. So they stand to pass a fair amount of assets on to their daughter, who was very successful in her own right. So during one of our discussions, we brought up the idea of Roth conversion. And the idea of the way that works is Lindsay and George are actually in a lower tax bracket than the daughter. So if the daughter inherits all this money the way it is, she's going to end up paying more taxes than Lindsay and George would if they took distributions now. So we started converting IRA money into Roth IRA money. Now let's use $25,000. I take that out of my IRA and I put it into a Roth IRA. What does that do? Well, that $25,000 goes on your income taxes. You're going to pay income tax on it. But again, Lindsay and George are in a lower tax bracket. See, this is an estate planning concept. Lindsay and George probably will never touch this money. But by transferring it into a Roth IRA, it is now allowed to grow tax-free. And ultimately, if Lindsay and George need it, they can take it tax-free or pass it on to their daughter tax-free. So that's the concept here of why you would want to consider a Roth IRA for some of your assets. It keeps the taxable portion of your estate plan from growing too fast because you're moving it into a Roth. We also made sure that their investment accounts and their bank account D on them, which stands for transfer on death, which means when George and Lindsay are gone, those healthy accounts that they have right now will bypass probate. Again, no probate fees at all, and go directly to their daughter. So two very, very important concepts there, the TOD on all your non-IRA type assets, and of course, the possibility of Roth conversion.
Yes, so at your death, your loved ones won't know where to turn or what to do. And Paul, you want to give us some insight on what that actually means?
Yeah, and you can have some fun with this one with today's technology and your phones and all. We usually recommend to everyone that we work with to have a letter of instructions. Just write down on a yellow pad. If you're reading this, that means I passed away. So call Paul and Adam, call the attorney, call the CPA, notify the church, and here's where the bank is, and here's the bank account numbers, and here's where our will is located, all that stuff. And then you can even do it easier. You can just set your iPhone up if you have one and make a video and send it to them. And then this way they have the information. So when that day comes, and it might be something that is shocking and tragic, they won't show up and say, okay, what do we do first? They will have all that information at their fingertips and be able to take care of things in a very smooth manner and probably less costly manner as well. So that's important. You can do it very easily. Letter of instructions, video, and have some fun doing it.
And our next story here is Blue Collar Joe. We're going to talk about the importance of insurance coverage and having family members that are prepared and know what to do when death does come. So Paul, you want to share the story of Blue Collar Joe?
Yeah, and just as we go through it, some people might say, well, geez, how is this estate planning? Well, this was estate planning to make sure that his family was okay if something happened to him. So we have Joe, who was 42, a construction worker. I actually met him. I had his son on my Little League team, and he offered to help me with being a coach. And during our season together, he'd keep asking me question after question. And finally, we sat down and looked at all his documents and went over things. And one of the items that popped up is that he had purchased a $100,000 whole life insurance policy, so that if he passed away, the family had some money. And I then pointed out to him that $100,000 was not going to do the job with 3 children and a wife who was more or less a homemaker at that time. $100,000 was not going to go too far. So after our discussions, and I showed him the mathematical equation on how you figure out how much life insurance you need to have in play at that point in your life, and with those people depending upon you, we also put in play a $1 million term life insurance policy that would stay in effect until the children were past 18 years of age. He's a very nice guy, but unfortunately, 10 years after we had completed that planning, he did pass away from a very, very rare stomach cancer. The happy part is his children and his wife were able to stay in that house. The children all went to the high schools and schools that they were in. They did not have to uproot everything and move across town. The wife did get a part-time job. She didn't have to, but she wanted to once the kids were getting older and in high school. And to this day, she is still a very valued client. And the 3 boys are all adults and off on their own doing a good thing. Change the situation. If that $1 million life insurance policy was not put in force, the outcome would have been very, very different. So again, life insurance is important at all ages, and it is part of your estate plan. And having the right amount, it's not just guesswork. It's not just what you can afford. There's mathematical computations to tell you how much you need to have in place.
All right, so the surviving spouse may not be able to access funds right away. Another reason that estate planning is important. And Paul and I had a situation pop up recently, didn't we, Paul?
Yeah, unfortunately, that was this past Memorial Day. A very good client named Chris. He had been in a couple of very terrible car accidents, rear-ended, and he had been through multiple back surgeries and apparently was in excruciating pain for a very, very long length of time. And we were managing his retirement assets. We spoke to him and met with him a couple times each year. And we had spoken with the wife but never actually met her. Anyway, she called in tears one morning and informed us that Chris had committed suicide over the weekend. This was Memorial Day. And she didn't know what to do because Chris was the one paying all the house bills and living expenses. And she didn't know what she was going to do now at this point, since that account was in his name, and she was afraid she might lose the house. Well, she was the beneficiary. That was all done properly. So we were able quickly to change the account into her name, transfer the assets over, and the monthly distributions that we had set up that went to Chris's account to pay all the bills. We were able to set that up for her as well. And to this day, she still lives in the house, and everything is going well. But it was, again, a tragic situation, and we were able to help out, and everything happened smoothly because all the proper documents were in place. All right, sweet Sally, nice story. So here we have Sally. On the older side, she was referred to us by some existing clients. And Sally lives in a house that's been in her family for generations. It was built in the early 1900s. And it's her desire that the house will stay in the family, hoping that somebody will take over after she's done living there. But of course, she's very concerned. She continues to hear from friends and the media that, if she goes into a nursing home, the house could be an asset that becomes a lien to pay for her care. She does not have a whole lot of money, usually just has some bank CDs and savings accounts. And we referred to her, and after our discussions with her and what her desires were and goals and what she wanted to see happen, we mentioned the life estate could be a valuable item to put in place for. Now, what a life estate is you actually have beneficiaries that you attach to the house. And when you pass away, it bypasses probate. The house passes right to whomever you've listed as beneficiaries. In the meantime, you continue to live in that house. You pay all the bills, you do the gardening, you do everything. And as long as enough time has gone by, and currently that's usually 5 years, if Sally had to go into a nursing home, they would not be able to lien the estate to pay for the cost that's incurred with Sally being there. So in her case, the main thing was to preserve the house. We were able to do that with a life estate. Sally still lives there, still healthy, still going strong. And whether or not a nursing home ever comes into play, who knows? But she does not have to worry about losing the house. Now, this is not something you do at a very young age. There are some difficult situations if you try to sell the house after a life estate is in place. So it's something usually done as you get a little bit older.
And before we get into the next slide here, just wanted to mention two quick things. First off, again, you do have that question and answer box, and we will get to as many questions as we can. And if we can't get to your question, we will respond back to you. And also, again, some people might be like, wow, there's a lot of information. This might be sort of difficult to consume. We've got a couple offers for you at the end of the webinar. So I want to make sure that you keep listening. And those offers, I think, can kind of help you in a big way. So just keep that in mind. And Paul, what's long-term care all about?
Yeah, long-term care, that's an item that came up when we were talking with Sally, but it is very expensive these days, the long-term care coverage, unless you have substantial assets, which Sally did not have. But we still explored that for her. And one way that we're able to, work with the different variables and get the premium to come down is long-term care has a couple of variables you may be aware of, maybe not. One is the elimination period. How much time has to go by before the insurance company pays the benefits, not you? And the second item is, how long does the insurance company have to pay those benefits? So what we try to do, and we're trying to get some long-term care coverage in place. I'm just going to make up some numbers, and we say we're going to have a 1-year elimination period, which means for the first year, you pay the bill at the nursing home. So let's use $50,000. So you have $50,000 set aside to pay for the first year of nursing home care. And after a year, the insurance company is now on the hook to pay the costs of the nursing home. And if we can keep that benefit period to 2-3 years, that will greatly reduce the risk to the insurance company, and it brings the premiums way down. Now, the reason why we're comfortable doing that is statistics tell us that usually when you go into a nursing home, you're not there for an extended period of time. You're either going to be going back to home where you live, or unfortunately, you're done and you passed away. So we all know people who have lasted a long, long time in the nursing home and those stories, but statistics prove out you're usually not spending a very long time in the nursing home again. You're either going to go back home or you're going to be passed away. So that is a way that you can still get some long-term care coverage in place. And again, it's another tool that we use in the estate plan.
All right, another reason why estate planning is so important is your beneficiaries may be unprepared for new responsibilities. We've talked a lot about having the right person and medical proxies and so forth. One thing to keep in mind is even if you have someone who's a beneficiary, maybe they're not the right person to manage money, right? We've had plenty of stories, Paul and I, in helping clients where there's a beneficiary, a son, daughter, friend who, squanders things and doesn't know how to manage money, doesn't understand really any of this kind of thing. So it's important to think about the people that you want involved here with your beneficiaries in estate planning. And I know Paul here, we just ran into this story recently. We got another one about Crazy James that kind of drives home the point here.
Yeah, this is it's a good one. The mom and dad were my clients for many, many years. They had 5 children. The parents had houses in a couple different states, but considered the Washington, D.C. Area, or I guess just in Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. as their legal residence. And a couple of the children lived in a different state, and 3 others lived in another state. So we've got the family spread out all over. And this is one of those stories where nobody talked about money. And so when dad passed away, everything went to mom, and there was still no discussions. I was involved with mom and dad a little bit, and assets that I was managing were the type of assets where we're able to put the beneficiaries in place, and that money actually transferred to the beneficiaries very smoothly at the time of death and bypassed probate. Unfortunately, with mom and dad living somewhat away from me, they had other advisors and people they worked with at the bank for a lot of their other assets. And when mom passed away, all things went crazy, and that's where you get crazy James here. Now, James was the eldest son, and back then, mom and dad said, well, the oldest son, he's the responsible one. He's this, he's that, he's the executor. He was a construction worker. He thought this was going to be a piece of cake, and he was going to be a shining knight in armor, and the whole thing collapsed very quickly. So they had no idea that mom and dad's estate was worth close to $5 million. They never talked about it. It was something that just was not talked about. It was taboo. And that's unfortunate. You should be talking about these things, especially when parents get older and, the whole idea of the estate plan comes to be. In their case, because certain things, mainly TODs and beneficiaries, were not done properly, there was over $350,000 of fees that were paid that could have been avoided. So as much as they all ended up inheriting a fair amount of money, there was so much money that was paid out to attorneys and all to get right documents in. And this thing took almost 2 full years, and it shouldn't have taken that time at all. The other one that was very interesting on this is mom and dad had a very large safe. It was filled with jewelry and firearms. Nobody had the combination. They had to wait until to go through the whole legal court and then have somebody come and drill out the lock and the whole bit and open it up. It was a huge to-do. Very little was done other than the part that I was involved with. But unfortunately, that's what happens sometimes. The worst part is, of the 5 children, 3 of them talk, but they don't talk to the other 2. So because things were not done right, not only was there monetary loss, but now you have a family that doesn't talk to each other.
Yeah, tough story. Imagine paying those fees, an attorney, and the family issues. So, ouch. All right, we are in the home stretch here of the webinar. We're going to get to your questions in just a minute, but another couple of important concepts we just want to go over. Transfer on death. You had mentioned, Paul had mentioned that in the story about Lindsay and George. But Cigar Larry, he's a real guy down in Myrtle Beach. You might see him walking around, big burly guy who likes to smoke cigars and drink bourbon, as you might imagine. Larry, I think he's heard some of our webinars and some of our talks before, because he's heard all these horror stories that we've just gone over. Larry's about 75. He's built up some significant assets, and he does not want his family and friends to go through probate, a complicated legal process. He doesn't want family members to fight each other. And what can Larry do? Well, he can do what's known as transfer on death. And again, transfer on death is very simple. You go to your bank, your investment assets, and say, listen, I'd like to add a TOD designation to these accounts. By adding transfer on death, you can bypass probate, and those assets can go directly to the beneficiary. So the point is that the TOD, the main lesson is, it makes it so much easier for your beneficiaries to manage your estate when you have TOD designations. And in Larry's case, he can keep smoking cigars and drinking bourbon and having a good time because he's got those TODs on his accounts.
Okay, philanthropy. Usually as we're talking estate planning, the word philanthropy comes up. We've somewhat been successful, and we want to remember those places and organizations that helped us become successful. So it might be like, I'd like to leave something to the church, the university, and there gives gifts to different places as we go. And that should be part of the estate plan. So there are a number of different ways to do it. You can just write a check to your church or to your university that you went to. One item that we see that is done wrong most of the time is, let's say you're at that point in life where you need to take a required minimum distribution from your IRA assets. So we'll say that you have to take $10,000 this year. So you call up, you say, send me $10,000, hold 20% for taxes. So you end up with $8,000, and then you turn around and write an $8,000 check to the charity. there is a way to just have that whole $10,000. You don't touch it. It goes directly from the account right to the charity. This way, the charity gets the whole 10,000. You don't pay any taxes on that money. The one who loses is the government, taking the 20% for taxes. And we know how well they like to spend our tax money. Perhaps you wanted to have your name on a lecture hall, a university that you went to. Well, let's make believe you have $100,000 in the bank, and you just like the interest. Let's make it 5%, and so that's makes you comfortable having that. Well, what if you took that 100,000 and you gave it to the university? You have an immediate $100,000 tax write-off, and it can be set up so that the university sends you that same 5% interest every year. So if you needed a big tax write-off for your estate, you can give that money to the university. They send you the interest every single year, and someday your name is on the lecture hall. So again, when we get to philanthropy, there's many different ways to do that. You could name your religious organization as part of your IRA, and you could name the you can have a number of different beneficiaries. So a lot of different ways to give money to the organizations that you find important. All right, last item, and don't get nervous. We're not going to get too detailed on this, but trusts do come into play, especially when you have large estates, as the one that I just went over with Crazy Jim. One item that is important that we run into quite often with the trusts, and that's when we have a family member who might have some special challenges and might need some help beyond your lifetime. And where we get involved with that is we set up what's known as a special needs trust. Now, these trusts are set up so that if the individual is receiving government benefits, the trust can never have so many assets that it would have those benefits voided because they have money in their name. So the special needs trust comes into play. It's typically funded with life insurance, but that doesn't have to be the only way. There's a lot of different ways to fund it. And then you'd have a trust that's funded with money to help pay for the benefits as needed for that person going forward after you've gone on. So it's a very simple way. There are many different types of trusts, but that is a common one that we run into often.
All right, let's talk about some action steps that you can take today. One of the things that we hope you got from this webinar is things that you can do that don't require any difficulty or something that's complicated. So first off, the bullet point, check the beneficiaries in all your accounts. You want to update per stirpes, right? Remember the story of Andrea and passing money on to her children, grandchildren, and then mechanical Billy, and having the ex-girlfriend on his beneficiary form. So we want to make sure beneficiaries are updated. Add transfer on death designations to accounts. Remember Cigar Larry, and he's able to smoke his cigars and bourbon because he's got those TODs in place. You want to consider who your medical proxy is. You remember the story of McDonald's Jerry and the story that Paul shared in the beginning about his father. Roth conversions, Lindsay and George, and taxes and how to pass on assets to children without getting killed by taxes. A life estate and Sweet Sally. Certainly for people of a certain age, they want to stay in their home and be able to pass that home on to beneficiaries and avoid having liens on the home. A life estate is something to consider. And review insurance coverage, right? The story of Blue Collar Joe, making sure that insurance was in place to protect your family. And kind of the last bullet point here, are your investment portfolios matching your risk and expectations? People sometimes think they're going to go early and don't realize you might actually live a lot longer than you think, and you don't want your money to run out. So that's why having a good investment portfolio is relevant to all of these things. All right, it's fun time, question and answer session. A couple of questions did come in, and mentioned if we don't get to your question, we will respond in due course and get back to you. First off, our first question is, what is a step up in cost basis?
Great question. These are accounting type topics, and it was mentioned in there. Step up in basis was one of them. And what that is, we'll use an example. Let's say your dad bought Apple stock and it was worth $100,000 when he bought it. He held it for a number of years, and he passed away. And when he passed away, the stock was worth $150,000. Well, if you inherit that stock, you get what's known as a step up in basis, meaning the figure that they'll use, whether or not you ever owe taxes, is $150,000 versus where dad's cost basis was $100,000. So if you inherit an asset, it typically gets the step up in basis. What was its value on the date of death? And that's what you get as your cost basis. Again, if dad had the stock and its basis was 100,000 and he gave you Apple stock, your cost basis is 100,000. So there's a difference between money that is gifted or assets that are gifted and whether the assets are inherited. So very, very big difference there.
Very good. Another question came in, which is, I've inherited IRAs from my parents. Do I pay taxes on that account? So to answer your question is yes, the government wants their tax money. Inherited IRA accounts, you're going to be required to take what's known as required minimum distributions, and you are going to have to pay taxes on those distributions. Of course, we're all happy to receive money and assets like that, but yes, the government wants their cut, and it is something that you're going to have to report as income. So that's a good question to ask. All right, looks like another one came in, which is, I am concerned that my family will contest our will. What can I do to mitigate that risk?
Well, as we mentioned with the one story, making sure that all your documents are current and updated. You have a will that's very, very, very old, and a lot of life events have transpired. Someone might, be able to claim that it's not valid anymore. So if your documents are current, if all the different items that we've talked about today are current, TODs, beneficiaries, and your will and all, a life estate, whatever it might be, if there's anybody trying to contest it, they won't have a leg to stand on. These are legal documents. And unless they're able to prove that you were not of sound mind when you did these things, which would be very, very difficult. Again, so making sure that all those documents are in place and they're not too old, they should be updated. You won't have any issues.
Very good. So any other questions that come in, we will answer, but we do want to respect your time. So we're going to get to the end here of our webinar, and this is the offer that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. It's a estate planning strategy session with Paul and myself. Of course, we're there on your screen. We also have a picture of our back office team at Commonwealth, the broker-dealer that we are affiliated with. And Paul and I have met with a number of clients, and we've gotten together and had this estate planning session. And people out, ask, well, what does that mean? What does that involve? Well, here's how it worked. Paul and I will meet with you either on the phone, Zoom, or in person. And at this session, what we do is we sit down and we kind of go over a lot of the things that we talked about here in the webinar. Do you have a will? Do you have a medical proxy? We review your insurance coverages. Does a life estate make sense for you? How are your investment portfolios lining up? Or do you want to do some Roth conversions? So we're going to go over all of those things. And in the end, you say, well, what does it really mean to me? Why should I do it? Well, you came to the webinar, so clearly you're serious about estate planning. You're serious about providing for your family, protecting your family. You don't want to, go to sleep and worry about, oh, my family members are going to kill each other someday. The fangs are going to come out. We want to sort of avoid the horror stories, some of them that you heard today, and we want to make sure that your estate planning goes really smoothly. So that is the estate planning strategy session. That's totally free to you. Make sure that you click the link and you can just fill out some information, and Paul and I will be in contact with you very, very quickly, and we will set that up. And again, that can be done over the phone, Zoom, or in person. And last but not least, I mentioned a freebie, another offer to you for a reward for being on the webinar. Our new book has just been published to Amazon, Learn Investing Now, How You Can Create an Effective Strategy in a World of Inflation, Volatility, and War. This book is selling on Amazon, but you're going to get it totally free today for being on the webinar. It's going to be emailed to you. And this book is really relevant, right? We just went through a really ugly bear market. The indexes last year were down at one point 25, 30%. We've got inflation, we've got war overseas. And a lot of people don't know how to manage their assets, and they just kind of invest and hope things work out. And this book goes through all the different strategies and client stories that Paul and I have used over the years that we can have really helped people enhance their portfolios and make them feel a lot better about how they're investing. So that's Learn Investing Now. You're going to get that. And feel free to reach out to us with any questions. I believe at this time, it's time to wrap things up. Any final words, Paul?
No, it usually just takes a little bit of effort to get your estate plan in place. You find out your strengths, your weaknesses, what you need to take care of and do or update and change. And it'll make everybody's life a lot easier somewhere in the future.
Great. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.